Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Chet Holifield Federal Building Tenant Relocation Draft Environmental Impact Statement public meeting. For all of those who are in attendance, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to attend yet another Zoom meeting, and as I'm sure all of us are frequently attending these days. We will go through the presentation, and then we will have a public comment session after the presentation is done. But right now, we will start with some self-introductions. So from my contracting team, go ahead, Paul.
Hi, my name is Paul DiPaolo. I'm a contractor supporting the preparation of the EIS.
My name is Samir Qadir. I'm also a contractor supporting GSA with this project.
And my name is Greg Jackson. I'm also a contractor supporting this project.
Okay, and from my GSA team, Serene, go ahead.
Hi everyone, Serene Wetzel. I'm the branch chief of asset management and the portfolio management division.
Jared, why don't you follow Serene?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jared Trout. I'm the Senior Asset Management Manager for the Chet Holifield Building.
And then Jane and Tom.
I'm Jane Lehman. I am the Regional Historic Preservation Officer with GSA for Region 9.
And I'm Tom Doskotch. I'm the Project Manager with the Office of Property Utilization and Disposal for the eventual sale and conveyance of Chet Holifield.
All right, well, thank you so much to the team. You guys can hit your mute and cameras for now. So the meeting agenda today, which you can now see on your screen, first of all, of course, the welcome, the review of the National Environmental Policy Act requirements and the EIS process. Then we'll go through the current timeline, where we are in the NEPA process, the review of GSA's project, a quick summary of the findings of the draft EIS, the next steps, and then we will head into the public comment session. So the purpose of this meeting is really to provide an overview of GSA's project and then discuss the findings of the draft EIS. This also gives the public an opportunity to interact directly with the project team and to provide comments on the draft EIS. We will also be informing the public of the next steps in this planning process. So a little bit of background on just what NEPA is, and why we're holding this meeting. NEPA requires that all federal agencies consider the potential impacts to both the human and natural environment for all proposed federal actions. GSA, like I mentioned, has prepared a draft EIS under NEPA to document potential impacts from implementation of the proposed action at Chet Holifield. Like I've mentioned, NEPA provides the public with opportunities to comment on the findings of the draft EIS, and in this case, interact directly with the project team via the Q&A/comment section after the presentation. GSA will review all comments, whether received during this meeting or via email or mailings, and those comments and questions will be answered in the final EIS. So in terms of where we are in the project right now, for those of you who came to our public scoping meeting last fall or made comments during the public comment period, thank you. That was held last October. We then published a draft EIS, and we are now in the draft EIS comment period, which ran from July 8th and will end September 4th. That means if you would like to submit any public comments, please do so by September 4th. We will then take all those comments and answer them, and put them into the final EIS. The final EIS will have a waiting period of 30 days, as a minimum of 30 days, before GSA can sign a record of decision, which is the final document in the NEPA process, indicating the intended action that we plan to take. For those of you who don't know, I wanted to provide a little background on the building. The Chet Holifield Federal Building was built in 1970 by Aerospace and Systems Group of North American Rockwell Corporation. It was actually never occupied by them and was transferred to the federal government in 1974. Right now, the Chet Holifield Federal Building has 12 different federal tenants, houses about 3,000 workers, and the primary occupant is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is a bit of a mouthful. So we refer to them as USCIS. The building is about 1 million square feet of office space and a little bit of warehouse space, and is located on an 86.5 acre parcel. There's also a 5.5 acre parcel which contains some utility equipment just across the street on Avila Road. GSA is considering multiple different alternatives to relocate tenants off-site and dispose of the Chet Holifield Federal Building. Regionally, the Chet Holifield Federal Building is in Laguna Niguel, which is in Orange County between Los Angeles and San Diego, and only about 4 miles from the Pacific coastline. It's in a high value real estate area, and mostly in the suburbs, which mostly comprises of retail and residential. Here is the existing Chet Holifield site. You can see the main site it's mostly parking, but with the Chet Holifield Federal Building, and then that small 5.5 acre parcel housing a couple utilities. The overall purpose and need for the project is to accommodate the long-term office space requirements for the current tenants at the Chet Holifield Federal Building, while meeting applicable building code accessibility and security standards. The need is really the current working space does not meet GSA's building accessibility and security standards. There was a few project alternatives considered. Those include the 2 action alternatives and the no action alternative, which is really used to baseline the impacts, or I should say the potential impacts of the other 2 action alternatives. Alternative 1 would include construction of a new federal building for USCIS only. It would be on the existing parcel, and we would keep a small portion of that parcel for to house that building and that agency. The rest of the current tenants would be relocated into lease space, primarily within Orange County. The existing building and the remainder of the property, not retained for construction, would be disposed of. Alternative 2 would include relocation of all federal tenants, about 3,000 workers, still primarily within Orange County, which is similar to Alternative 1. We would include a new lease location for USCIS outside of the Chet Holifield Federal Building, and the entire Chet Holifield Federal Building and surrounding property would be disposed of. This obviously means no new construction would occur. This is really disposal of the entire parcel and building. The no action, which like I mentioned, is really our baseline alternative, which we use to compare the other alternatives to. The tenants would remain, basically nothing would change. No new construction or relocation would occur, and minor repairs could occur as needed, and maintenance on operation of the existing facility would continue. So alternative one, this is the proposed site layout. As I mentioned, it's a portion of the site. It's about roughly a third. And you can see where we had envisioned that to occur. Still, that red outlined area would be disposed of. This is a simple rendering of what the new USCIS building was originally intended to look like. Again, that is very open to change throughout the project. So, future development of the Chet Holifield Federal Building site following disposal is not part of GSA's proposed action, which is important to remember. Our action in this case would be disposal of the parcel and the building. Also, once we dispose of the property, we are no longer in control. It is important to remember that since we're in California, unless another federal agency takes control of the site, which is very unlikely at this point, future development of the site would have to be analyzed under the California Environmental Quality Act, which would give the public another bite at the apple in terms of commenting or expressing any desires for outcome of the site. Like I mentioned, there's two general outcomes. The property would either remain in federal ownership by another federal entity, or the property would be transferred out of federal ownership, either to a state, local, or a private owner. Under either scenario, the public would have additional opportunities, like I mentioned. In the case of a future federal owner, any development that they did at the site or any action, including placing new tenants in the building, would require additional NEPA analysis, which would, again, give the public a couple more shots at the apple of comment and expressing any concern or desire. If it is a non-federal owner, they would have to go through CEQA, and again, the public would have a chance to express any desires or comments publicly. DIS considers impacts generally from a future development of the site, whether that's renovation, new construction, infill development. But as no plans currently exist for development and a future landowner is not known, we kind of just had to do those as a general. We didn't have any project specific plans to go by. Potential future development of the site in compliance with all federal, state, and local laws and regulations would be the responsibility of the future landowner and not GSA. Again, once we transfer it out of the GSA portfolio, what happens with it is up to the new landowner. Please refer to the EIS for discussion of these potential impacts from future development. There are also a couple of alternatives considered, but dismissed because they did not meet the purpose and need for the proposed action. Repair and alteration was one of those. There's a couple different alternatives which consider repair and alteration, but they were dismissed due to lengthy construction periods and the need to perform construction while tenants were in the building. That really disrupts the operations and affects agencies' ability to meet their mission. There was a couple that were cost prohibitive or would still not meet certain federal building requirements. We also looked at new construction for all tenants. but it was not viable to the excessively high upfront capital costs that prohibited the funding in the current budget environment. This is a little table of the EIS findings. You can see that there is a couple significant impacts from the alternatives, but those really were unavoidable. Again, these do not include impacts from future development, as those would be the responsibility of the new landowner once the parcel is transferred out of the GSA portfolio, no matter who it went to. And a quick note, this presentation will be uploaded to the same site where you found the link for this meeting, as well as the draft EIS is up, and a quick handout. So a quick summary of the findings of the EIS. Alternative 1 would include construction, which have minor temporary impacts on the nearby natural environment. There'd be disruption to soils, water resources, and a small amount of biological resources. And then there would also be temporary impacts to the human environment via noise, traffic, and air emissions, which could affect nearby land uses and residents, but only in the short term. Construction of a new building would result in long-term moderate changes to the visual landscape. With alternative 2, because it does not include any construction, it would not affect the natural environment or any nearby land uses or residences. And again, if it was to be developed, that would be under the responsibility of the new landowner. And I apologize, I keep repeating that, but I think it's an important point to keep in mind. There could be moderate economic impacts with both alternative 1 and significant in alternative 2, from relocation of workers outside of Laguna Niguel. Although under both alternatives, tenants' places of work are expected to remain primarily in Orange County, and workers are not expected to relocate their place of residency. Future development of the CHFB site would likely offset local job losses in Laguna Niguel in the long term. Workers may need to change commuting patterns, which could lead to either an increase or a decrease in travel time and air emissions depending on the final lease locations and where the workers reside. No net new trips are expected from either action. And here the Section 106 process is the historic process, which is why I asked Jane Lehman to attend this meeting in case there is any specific comments or questions on the 106 process. But just a quick overview. The Section 106 process covers the National Historic Preservation Act and requires GSA to evaluate potential effects on properties listed or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places prior to an undertaking. For example, we would have to evaluate the effects of a disposal of the Chet Holifield site, or if we did new construction. Chet Holifield is determined to be eligible for the RHP due to the rarity of its architectural style, the big pyramid, and its association with the architect, William Pereira. Under alternative 1, there would be adverse effects from partial demolition of the landscaping and site plan. There would also be visual impacts related to loss of views to and from the historic property. Under both alternatives 1 and 2, potential disposal of the historic property out of federal ownership would constitute an adverse effect when done without adequate and legally enforceable restrictions to ensure long-term preservation. To avoid the effects on the historic property, the transfer could include specific deed restrictions or covenants on the property. And those would be held in a trust after, in other words, they would no longer be held by GSA. These requirements could ensure future projects that would potentially affect the resources would be done in compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. GSA is currently undergoing or going through the Section 106 consultation with the State Historic Preservation Officer. Jane is spearheading that effort, and that is to determine the need for any deed restrictions, covenants, and or easements. It's also important to remember that that consultation will be completed prior, or has to be completed prior to the signature of the record of decision, which again would be after the final EIS. Here's just a nice picture of the landscape for those of you not familiar with the building, although if you're attending this meeting, I'm guessing you're familiar with the building. A couple more shots, the landscaping and the entrance. So now that we've covered the project and the impacts, or potential impacts, I should say, the next step is, well, next steps and previous steps. A notice of availability was published in the Federal Register on July 8th, which started the public comment period. Apologize. And again, a reminder: the public comment period ends on September 4th, 2020. So if you would like to submit a comment, please do so before that date. The final EIS will be prepared after the public comments are received by September the 4th and have been fully addressed and considered. The final EIS will be published this fall and will be made publicly available for a minimum of 30 days, during which, if you feel that your comment was not adequately addressed, you have a chance to bring that up with us. Another public meeting will be held during that 30 days and will be announced in the same fashion as this meeting. GSA will make its decision in the record of decision, and that decision will be announced in the Federal Register. Further, project updates will be available at the website indicated, where you found the details for this meeting. That brings us to the public comments. Written comments can be submitted by the two means below prior to that September 4th end of the public comment period date. You can submit them directly by email to me. You can call me, although I'm happy to discuss it. Those will not go into the administrative record, but I'm happy to cover anything that was covered during this presentation. If you would still like to mail a hard copy letter, it needs to be postmarked by September the 4th. And since we are in mandatory telework, and I'm not sure we'll be back before that date, it can be sent to the contractor team, to Paul at Potomac Hudson Engineering at 77 Upper Rock Circle, Suite 302 in Rockville, Maryland. The written and verbal comments that are provided tonight will, however, go into the public record and be considered in the preparation of the final EIS. With that, a few things to remember during this commenting session. If you are inside the Zoom meeting, please click raise your hand on the icon on the bottom of the screen. For those if there's anybody who's only calling in and not attending via the Zoom link, please press *9 to raise your hand and enter the queue for public comments. You will then be unmuted by the host, and then please state your name, affiliation, and city of residence for the public record. You can also submit a written comment during this session via the Q&A icon on the bottom of the screen. Please type your comment or question and click send, and we will address them in the order received. A few more householding items before we begin. Please limit any verbal comments to no more than 3 minutes to give everybody enough time. A reminder will be provided at 2.5 minutes, kind of a red light. You have 30 seconds left. And commenters will be muted if they continue to speak past their allotted limit, again, to give everybody time to speak. If you do wish to provide additional comments, please summarize your views with the allotted time and submit additional comments in writing after the meeting. That's important to remember. If you don't feel like 3 minutes is enough talking time, you're more than welcome to submit any further comments to us in writing. If you are calling in by phone, please, for the sake of our attendees and panelists, please avoid using the speakerphone so that we can hear you clearly. And I wouldn't think anybody in this group would, but just as a reminder, use of crass or vulgar language during the verbal commenting period or through the Q&A chat window will not be tolerated and will result in your removal from the meeting. So I will leave this open during the Q&A period. And Paul, if you can please start with any comments that we have so far received. And again, they will be answered in the order received.
Great, thank you, Osman. So as he mentioned, for anyone wishing to make a verbal comment, please click the raise hand icon, or if there's a few call-in folks, so you can dial *9, and that will prompt us that you're looking to speak. And if you wish to submit a comment through the written comment, you can do so through the Q&A window. So far, we don't have any hand raisers or Q&A comments. As Osman mentioned, if you think of a comment or question later, you're able to submit a comment or question via email on the address on the previous slide. Give it a few more minutes in case anyone would like to submit a comment. Looks like we got our first question entered through the Q&A. The question is, are there any concerns about impacts of different alternatives to anything beneath the property? Subtitles with that. Is any public analysis of that available?
No. any construction will need to go through further NEPA analysis, which would require most likely ground penetrating radar, but we have not done that yet. So there is no public analysis of that available yet. I'm guessing you mean any kind of indigenous artifacts, but further than that, I would like Jane Lehman to weigh in if she has anything to add.
Yeah, this is Jane Lehman. We did consult with the South Central Coastal Information Center, and they had 22 previously recorded cultural resources within a 1 mile search radius of the property. None documented within the property that we're disposing of, but 5 within 0.15 miles. So there isn't any cultural resources known on the property. There are some close by. We've had one tribe that expressed interest in the location, and they'll participate in the Section 106 consultation, as will the California, I've forgotten their name, but another nonprofit Native American group will participate. So that's the archaeology component to it.
Thank you, Jane. And I assume that's what the question was referring to.
The other possibility could be any site contamination or anything with the soils. There's no known site widespread contamination of the site or any soils, but the hazardous waste section discusses any issues related to site hazards or things of that nature. So I encourage you to read that section if you have further questions.
Thank you, Paul.
This is Tom Doskotch. From a conveyance standpoint, while the property will be conveyed as is, where is by law, CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, does need to be complied with, which applies to subsurface condition as it relates to hazardous substances. And so that will be delineated in the sale documents and conveyance instruments. The only other aspect of this site, typical for federal buildings, would be an operational and in compliance underground storage tank that will also be transferred appropriately.
Thank you. I see we have another question. Is the site on the National Register of Historic Places? Jane, can you handle that? I know the building is, and I understand the view shed is, but can you handle the site aspect?
I can take that. None of it actually is listed in the National Register of Historic Places yet. It's been determined eligible for the Register through federal agency consultation, as we're required to do when we have an undertaking on the property. It is in the process, as we do with all of our buildings that are determined eligible, to list it in the National Register, but we're not, nothing has happened yet on it. It's just a draft nomination yet. So, as it stands now, the building is the important part. That's the reason that it was considered exceptionally significant, is because of the rarity of the architectural style. The site does contribute to the, the site's original. The layout of the parking and the landscape is original, but it doesn't contribute necessarily to the architectural significance of the building. But again, it is not listed in the National Register yet.
Thank you for that clarification, Jane.
So the lines are still open. If anyone would like to make a verbal comment, again, clicking the raise hand feature in the bottom of your screen, or again, a written comment can be submitted through the Q&A window.
or via the phone line by dialing *9.
Thank you, Osman. Looks like we got another comment that came in, again regarding the listing on the National Register. What is the likelihood that it will be listed on the National Register, a Registry of Historic Places?
Again, this is Jane Lehman. I would say it's pretty likely that it could get listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a bit of a long process, but it I think is eligible, and I believe that the National Register will accept it into the accept it for listing in the future.
Looks like we got another comment come in. Why doesn't the building meet GSA standards?
Well, the building was built in the 1970s or built in 1970 and occupied in the originally occupied in the 1970s. So building standards have changed. I think it's important to remember that the building is still safe to occupy, but that as standards have changed, the building has not managed to change with them. And I hope that answers your question, by the way.
I think it's also important to note that there is in the chapter 1 a more detailed list of the specific standards that the specific GSA standards that aren't currently being met. That again, would encourage you to review.
Looks like we have another comment.
Okay,
Yes.
this is Jane again. I'll take the next one.
Up your alley again. Okay, thanks, Jane.
Yes, we are actively working on the National Register nomination. You know, that is part of our Section 110 responsibilities. Once a building is determined to be eligible for the National Register, we are obligated by both the legislation and by GSA directives to go ahead and work toward listing that building, and that is what we're doing. And it's in process. It's in with a group of 4 or 5 buildings altogether that we are working toward listing in the National Register.
Does look like we had our first hand raise. It's a caller, so we don't actually have your name. It's the caller ending in 5045. Caller, I would ask that you state your name, affiliation, and city of residence for the record. And just a reminder, again, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and you are now live to speak.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, good. My name is Barbara Thomas, and I'm the Executive Director of the South Orange County Economic Coalition here in South County. And I was just curious as to just 2 questions. If the building does make it on the National Registry, does that mean that the building stays intact? And my second question is, what is the timeline with this process that you're looking at? And is there any interaction that you would have with the city at all, or the business community? It's just been such a large part of the economics down here, and I was just curious as to how you view this.
So I'll let Jane take the historic question, and then I will answer the coordination question, if that's okay.
Okay, so this is Jane, and let me state one thing first. So I did say that we are actively working toward getting the building listed in the National Register, but for federal agency purposes, a building that is determined eligible for the National Register is treated the same as a building that's actually listed in the National Register. So our actions through the Section 106 process are similar, no matter whether the building has been just determined eligible or it's actually listed. And I forgot, what was your specific question about the National Register? Can you repeat that?
Well, would the building have to stay intact? I mean, I think there were different things that you were looking at doing, and if it did make that the list, or if it was eligible, would the building have to stay as is?
Well, what's going to happen is the first alternative that we would consider through the Section 106 process is having a covenant or an easement placed on the property that required the future work to be in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic properties, and that would require it to stay intact. Unless something happened that was big, and then the property owner would have to go into consultation with whoever is holding that easement in order to come up with what future work could be done on the building, uses, and conditions like that. So the future owner is going to have an easement or a covenant on the property. That's the first way that we go into consultation. So it would require saving the building. And then you also asked if the city of Laguna Niguel was participating, and they are an interested party in the Section 106 consultation already. So they're involved with the whole process.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And separately, we have been in coordination once a month at least with both the city and staff on a general basis, but also handling any questions that they have. Does that fully answer your question?
It does, and I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your comment, or question, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So we don't currently have any hand raises or Q&A questions, but we'll continue to leave both open. Looks like we have one question. On the Q&A window, will disposition of the property be led by the Public Buildings Reform Board and its staff in conjunction with the other assets included in their report?
Yeah, this is Tom Doskotch. So the Public Building Reform Board is working in partnership with GSA under the FASTA legislation, the Federal Asset and Transfer Act, for disposition of this property. GSA will ultimately be conveying the property, as that's required as well in the law and the authorities within GSA, but the board is integrally involved in the planning for the sale, which we expect will be next spring.
Still no hand raises or comments, but again, if you're calling in or looking to put a verbal comment, you can click the hand raise button. If you're calling in, you can dial *9. And again, if you are accessing through the app, you can submit a written comment through the Q&A feature. Looks like we have another comment come through the Q&A. How long is the whole process? Oh, I think you might be muted, Osman.
Sorry, I realized I had muted myself. Apologize. I'm going to assume since we're discussing the historic or 106 process that you're referring to that, and I will let Jane handle that.
Yeah, so with respect to the 106 process, that generally goes along with the speed of the undertaking. I expect with this particular project, if we do have an easement on the building or covenant, and the building is sold through the public sale, that we could be through this process within 6 to 8 months, I would think. That would give everybody plenty of time to comment, to draft easements, to work on something like that. Again, it does depend on ultimately what the new owner is going to be proposing to do and things like that. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but yeah, maybe Osman too, you should talk about the NEPA process too. So if it takes us 6 months to get the 106 document signed, then where does that leave NEPA?
I might be muted again, Osman.
Keep muting myself so I don't make noise while Jane is talking. That would leave us in a little bit of limbo as we prepare the NEPA document. We do need to wrap up finalize the Section 106 process before we can sign the record of decision. So we would go ahead with the final EIS, and then we would be waiting to sign the record of decision because the 106 process needs to conclude before we can make our final decision. And that final decision will include the findings of that 106 process and any mitigation measures that we need to include in that document.
May also be helpful for to go back to the timeline slide, which is on, I believe slide 5, that provides the overview of the the NEPA process, at least.
Yeah, so you can see, even if it's 6 months from now, that probably wouldn't hold up the NEPA process. The public comment period doesn't end for another month. And then, of course, we would need time to address any comments received, prepare the final document, and then even once the final document is submitted, we'll need to schedule the public meeting and wait at least 30 days after the publication of that final EIS before the record of decision can be signed. But I wanted to bring up on the screen the process that we're currently going through.
Looks like we got a couple more questions through the Q&A. So the next one is, for historical reference, any information on why the building was named after Chet originally? I've read that in Congress, Chet Holifield was most remembered for wanting to create a nationwide system of underground shelters for emergency preparedness.
Quite honestly, I had not looked into that. Jane, have you considered why the building was named for Chet Holifield?
Well, I know that he was a long-serving congressman in that area, many, many terms in Congress. And I'm trying to think, I think he advocated the federal government acquiring the building too. We acquired, the building was originally built as a headquarters for the an aerospace company. And it was kind of a manufacturing / administrative building. And that goes back a little bit to why it doesn't work as well for GSA. The 3 lower floors are large windowless floors. They weren't really meant for office space. But anyway, GSA acquired the building in the mid-70s, and it was because of Chet Holifield. He was instrumental in that acquisition. But I don't remember a lot of the specifics like you talk about here about whether or not he was instrumental in other, in the other things. So I apologize for that. I don't know really.
We have another question in the Q&A. How soon would employees be relocated to commercial space?
Well, that would be after any 106 process was completed, as well as the NEPA process was completed. Realistically, I believe that process, we will also have to go through the disposal process, and then once it went through those 3 processes, we would have to go out to the market and find lease space for the tenants. Jared or Serene, can you touch on where you guys are on the timeline for the relocation of federal tenants?
Hey, Osman, it's Serene. I would say that our leasing group is actively working with our tenant agencies to develop plans for relocation. We have one scheduled as early as 2021. However, we do need to complete the FASTA process. And under the legislation, we will have a time requirement on the leaseback allowance. So that will all be triggered on the final date of the actual sale.
Thank you, Serene.
Osman, this is Tom Dowscott. Just to tack off the past couple comments, and I think the questions and answers are really hitting on the key in terms of the real estate transaction. And these processes are moving concurrently. We've got to identify for the offering of the property for sale as best as we can in the timeframes that we're under to define the terms and conditions of the sale generally and specifically. The leaseback requirements for all the tenants and everything that goes into that lease action for new space, as well as Serene just indicated, the lease back on site until the tenants relocate. That's number 1. And number 2, concurrently, is the consultation under Section 106 to define the specific provisions, mitigation measures, and terms of sale. That will define the offering and provide information, relevant information to the marketplace. And so these actions and the planned timing of the sale all go hand in hand. And so I think that it's a good synopsis of the key pieces that are involved in across the board for this effort.
Thank you, Tom.
So it looks like go ahead, Osman.
And just as a quick note, a reminder, if you feel like you didn't quite get the full answer to your question or comment, please feel free to submit any further comments or questions via email or hard copy.
does look like we have another hand raise. I believe this is the previous caller. But if you could state your name for the record, and we will. This is the caller. I'm sorry. This is the caller ending in 5045, and you are now unmuted.
Great, thank you very much. And I will submit, if I have any additional questions, I'll submit them in writing. Thank you for taking my question now. Do you have the demographic breakdown of where the employees are coming from that work at the ziggurat? Are they primarily from South Orange County, or are they coming in from other areas? I was curious of that breakdown. And again, my name is Barbara Thomas, and I'm with the South Orange County Economic Coalition. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you, Ms. Thomas. We do not have a full breakdown of all the tenants. While we could pass out surveys, it would be their prerogative to turn them in or not. So in short, we do not have a full breakdown of that. But I'm guessing you're worried about, or your concern is that agencies may not want to move within the Orange County area?
Well, I was just curious. You know, many of our employer groups down here in South Orange County, a lot of the employees come from, you know, outside of the area, and I was just kind of curious from a not only a traffic standpoint and in relocating them and where, but also just the economics of having that many employees in the city of Laguna Niguel, patronizing other businesses and things like that. So it was kind of twofold. I was just kind of curious. So, but thank you.
Sure. We are focusing our leasing efforts on the requirements provided by our customers. So they typically will incorporate those considerations into their requirements. But further than that, we do not have a formal breakdown of the residences or the city of residence, I should say, of our federal tenant agencies.
Thank you.
Sure.
So the lines are still open. Don't currently have any hand raises or Q&A questions, but again, click the raise hand icon or dial *9 or submit a written comment to the Q&A window.
Just one more quick note, Ms. Thompson. Our expectation is that the agencies would predominantly remain in the Orange County area, based on the preliminary, I should say, requirements that we have seen from our tenant agencies thus far. And sorry, I'm tripping over a couple words there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. So if we don't, we'll leave the lines open until about 5:15. Unless we continue to get comments, we will then shut off the lines. But again, you're more than welcome to submit any comments after that time to me via email or hard copy, or you can also call me if you'd like to have a discussion, and I will give you any information that I readily have, or I can point you in the right direction and follow up with you later.
Looks like we have another comment or another question through the Q&A window. What are the odds of the no action being the choice or selected into the action?
I don't want to put odds on it, but given the purpose and need for this project overall, and that the no action alternative does not meet that purpose and need, I would say that it is likely that one of the two action alternatives are taken.
Just a reminder to everyone that these slides are available in addition to the document and other project documents on the project website, which is gsa.gov/ChetHNEPA. And that also provides further instruction for providing public comment during the public comment period after this meeting, whether through email or regular mail.
And also for the earlier questions regarding the board and disposal generally, you can always visit www.pbrb.gov for postings by the board pursuant to FASTA, as well as www.disposal.gsa.gov. And once we proceed further, property-specific information will begin to be posted on our disposal website.
Looks like we had another comment come through the Q&A window. Serene said that one agency might be relocated in 2021. Can you share what that agency is?
Our GSA real estate folks are working with their client contacts, and that agency would be dependent on when their current occupancy agreement with GSA expires. So they're developing long-range relocation plans in anticipation of future developments at Chet, but also in conjunction with the timing of their current expiration for their occupancy agreements.
So we have about a few more minutes until the 5:15 cutoff. Again, if you click the raise your hand icon or dial *9 if you're calling by phone, or you can submit through the Q&A window.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to follow up with my last answer because I realized I might not have sufficiently answered the question. But until we do go out to market, all of that information is procurement sensitive, so we cannot share what that specific agency is.
Uzma, maybe might be helpful to go to the previous slide where the contact information and the project website are listed, just for folks' awareness. I think by now people probably know how to provide a comment. And again, the project website is not on not on this slide, but that's gsa.gov/Chet NEPA.
And I will give it a few more minutes. And yes, that website is www.gsa.gov/Chet NEPA, as in Chet Holifield NEPA. And if for any reason you do forget that, please feel free to send me an email, and I'll be happy to provide a link to the project website. And as we have a couple minutes left, and then unless we keep getting comments, I'd just like to thank everybody for your attendance and your participation. And again, welcome you to submit any other formal comments or questions to the addresses listed. So with it, if there's no other comments or questions, we'll wrap up in about 2 minutes, give you guys one last chance to submit any comments.
I know, just to let you know, and to everyone else, I did enter the website into the chat window. So there's a chat icon as well at the bottom of your screen, which has a link to the project website.
Thank you, Paul. You beat me to it. All right, as that brings us to 5:15 and we haven't had any comments or questions for a few minutes, this will be the formal ending of the meeting. So once again, thank you to everybody who attended and participated in this meeting. And again, I look forward to hearing from some of you in the future or at our final EIS public meeting. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to my panel for answering the questions that I could not have as fully answered if you were not here. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Uzma.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.